Welcome to Taste Buds. I'm Debra Eckerling, goal strategist, writer, and foodie. And today I'm speaking with Amy Kritzer Becker, who's founder of What You Want to Eat and Modern Tribe. She's also the author of Sweet Noshings, New Twists on Traditional Jewish Desserts. So, Amy, welcome. I love
Thank you.
everything about everything that you do.
Oh, you're so sweet. Thank you.
Well,
Ditto.
sweet, I feel like sweet is the word of the day because sweet noshings. But before we dive into like Sugar Rush, how did you become you? Let's start there.
How did I become me? That's a very serious question. Well, I guess if you're asking how I started my blog, I grew up in Connecticut in like a very Jewish town where just being Jewish was very normal. Like I went to public school, we got off for Jewish holidays, and then I went to college in Georgia, and I met people who had never met a Jewish person. So I grew up very secular Jewish. I went to summer camp. I ate bagels on Sundays, but I didn't keep kosher or anything or go to synagogue regularly just for high holidays. But then suddenly in college, when I was not able to go home for Passover, I found that I was missing the Jewish traditions. So that's kind of how I started early on getting into Jewish cooking. I hosted my first Seder since it was just too far to go home. And I had friends of all religions come over. I made a brisket. We also had a keg and Easter candy because it was a very inclusive Seder. So, by my senior year, people were like, "Where are we going to do Seder next year?" And I'm like, "You're Hindu. What, you don't do Seder? Like, what are you talking about?" And then I moved to New York City after college, and I kind of fell back. When you live in New York, everyone's Jewish, so it's like I didn't feel the need to do Jewy things as much, if that makes sense. It's just all around you. So I kind of like there, I was doing conference producing, I was planning events. I was a really fast paced career. I was traveling a lot. And then the recession hit. This was in 2009. So I picked up and moved to Austin, Texas, because I visited it on a whim. We had discussed earlier, it was warm there. The men were tall. There was people were like, "What recession?" I'm like, "All right, great. I'll move here." So I really enjoyed my time there, except my job was not as creative as my job in New York. And at the time, blogs were just becoming popular. This was like 2010. People weren't really making money blogging. There wasn't much social media. I think there was just Facebook at the time. But I said, this is something I think I want to be a part of. And I've always grown up baking with my mom and Bubby, Jewish stuff like rugala, mandel bread, but also just cookies and brownies. We just love baking. So at the time, cupcakes were very trendy. So I said, I'm going to start a cupcake blog. And I told my brother, who's always been, maybe my voice of reason. I've been like the creative, whimsical one, and he's more of the practical one. So he said, a cupcake blog, you're going to get tired of that in a few months, years. And I definitely wasn't thinking I'd still be blogging in 2024. So he suggested doing Jewish food. And to me, I was like, that was just like normal food I grew up with. I didn't even think of it as a unique type of food. So he said, ask your friends in Texas if they know what kugel is. And of course, no one did. And I grew up very Ashkenazi. So all those traditional Ashkenazi foods were what I was thinking of when I was thinking Jewish food initially. I've definitely expanded my definition. So I said, I think you're onto something. So, this is 2010. I asked my Bubby for some of her recipes to get started. And she's the kind of person, no matter, what my interests are, she goes into it 100%. So she had my mom scan all of her index cards, email them to me, like all the, you can picture like the little lined note cards and everything. But so I took a look at those and I was like, what is this? Like they didn't have measurements weren't exact, it'd be like enough flour to make challah. I'm like, what is enough flour? And like bake it till it's done. So, I quickly got on the phone with her and talked through some recipes. So, all my recipes have been twists on traditional Jewish recipes. Part of it was because I love to put my own spin on things. I've never wanted to follow a recipe to a T. But also, I'm like, this is not a professionally written recipe. I need to add in some guidance here, and that was a learning curve for me as well. So yeah, I started blogging one new recipe a week. I called my brother and I always had this joke saying "Jew for you," so I called it "What Jew Want to Eat." I did not think this was going to be a business or anything, so I was like, whatever, this is funny. Sometimes I get people that are a little like, what is that offensive? Should I be offended? And it's usually people that aren't Jewish, so I'm like, no, it's fine. I think. Um, so I started blogging, and then pretty quickly I got some emails from readers that they were making my recipes. People sending me pictures. people saying how, they really felt connected to their Judaism through food, and I was like, I think I'm onto something. I think this is even bigger than just food. It's really part of our identity. And one reader in particular had grown up kind of without a religion, and her mom had passed away when she was young, and her mom was Jewish, her dad was not. So she really was trying to connect to her mom and her mom's side of the family by cooking my recipes, and this was just like mind blowing for me. I'm like crying at my desk at work, like this is so beautiful. So again, I wasn't making money on my blog, but I really felt this connection to food. So my initial idea was to be a private chef. So I quit my job and I went to culinary school to kind of learn partly how to like, develop recipes better, and then get some, credentials, and so I could develop my private chef business. But while I was in school, my blog was in a small business contest with Daily Candy, which at the time was very, a cool newsletter, the kind of like Oprah. They told you to buy something and you did. So I got a lot of
Right.
press from that, and I ended up dabbling into like freelance writing and recipe development, and I just started saying yes to anything people threw my way. They're like, "Yo, can you, make a recipe video for our brand of honey?" I'm like, "Sure, I can do that." So I'll figure that out. So that's kind of how I got started, and now it's 2024, and I'm still blogging, though not every week. I've slowed down a little.
Slow down in the blogging, but in like nothing else, right?
Yeah,
Because
no,
you're
yeah,
constantly
I'm busy. Yeah.
I love everything you said, and that's something really common that I hear from the people I interview is they got these recipes that were like this, add that, bake it till it's done, whatever. So I think it's really people like you, you're super important because you're taking the recipes from the past, making them makeable, but also adding that spin. So have you always been that out of the box type? I feel like you haven't.
Yeah, I mean, I think, even before when I was just cooking recipes for fun, I just, if it said cheddar cheese, I'm like, maybe I'll try Swiss cheese. I don't know. I'm not really one to follow directions exactly how they're going. So, I knew and I like to just experiment with different things and living different places. So I lived in New York, I lived in Texas. Eventually, I lived in Puerto Rico. Now I'm in the Bay Area. So I also like to incorporate local ingredients too in my cooking. I had met friends in Texas who were Jewish but grew up in Mexico, and they put chilies in their matzo ball soup. And I'm like, I love that. I love adding in things that make it you and make it personal. And I spoke at South by Southwest like years ago on a panel about cultural, like either religious or cultural food. And one person in the audience said they didn't have a culture. I was like, they're Caucasian from the Midwest. They're like, what's my culture? I don't have any cultural foods. I'm like, you definitely have a culture. I'm like, it's your casserole that your mom made growing up, but like that's your food. It doesn't have to be this like big fancy thing or anything. So I think making it your own, if you're Jewish but you're also Italian, and making this recipe that represents you, I think is something really fun that people can make and pass down to their future generations too.
And you keep saying the word fun, which is a word I also love.
Okay.
Um, and I'm a self-admitted reformed non-cook, so I didn't come to love cooking till a few years ago. But I think once people get the cooking is fun, it's a game changer. So how can people make cooking more fun?
I totally agree. I've taught a lot of cooking classes over the years, and people just get so nervous, take it so seriously. They're so worried they're gonna mess up, and I'm like, it's just food. Like the word, if you burn the whole thing, just like order a pizza, it's fine. And I think especially with hosting holidays, either Jewish or not, people put a lot of pressure on themselves, and um, they're just nervous how it's going to turn out. I'm like, people are there for you and for the whole experience, not just for your matzo ball soup. So part of it, I think, if you're hosting, like let other people are always like, can I bring something? I think people are like, no, I'm good. And then but just say yes. They want to bring something. Maybe make a few things and let other people bring things to take a little bit of the pressure. And just pick recipes that you can make either with your family or with your friends, or just not worry about like maybe making something with like 20 parts if you're getting started. Like maybe make latkes. Those are one of my favorite. When someone's like, "Oh, what's like your go-to Jewish recipe?" If people are starting to cook Jewish food, I love latkes. I I'm always torn between like wanting to eat them all year, wanting to save them for Hanukkah to make them special. But there's a few like tricks you can do to make them better, but like it's kind of hard to mess up. So maybe start with easier recipes, have fun with it. Like don't take it too seriously, and like just think of like the worst thing that's going to happen. And maybe if you're incorporating some weird flavors, it doesn't turn out that great. Try again later. It's okay. It's just food.
Well, and it's just food. I love that. In a latke, that's like 3 or 4 ingredients in oil,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
that's like the easiest thing on the
The potatoes
planet.
potatoes are cheap. I think sometimes, if you're making, like, a fancy steak or something, you're like, "Yeah, I spent some money on this, I don't wanna burn it." So I totally understand that too. I think something too when you're cooking is you can always add more and you can't, like, add less, so if you're making something savory and you're tasting it, like, maybe taste it before you add more salt, or when you're cooking it, take it off a little sooner than you think it's gonna be ready. And in baking's a little more precise with the measuring, and make sure you're actually measuring things accurately. So I think having those kinds of tricks too will help you be successful in your cooking.
Okay, so we wanna start with the recipes that have, like, a very few ingredients, very nice way to dip your toe in,
Yeah.
experiment with flavors, and then go to the 20-ingredient recipe or whatever
Yeah, and
down
I
the
think don't be
line.
afraid to like people. If I had a dime for every time someone emailed me, they're like, "That recipe has cilantro. I don't like cilantro. What should I do?" I'm like, "Don't use the cilantro." Like, especially if it's a garnish or something. I think people get really caught up in the details of a recipe. And I'm going to kind of contradict myself because definitely baking is a little more precise. But when you're making something savory, usually you can be a little more liberal with the ingredients, and if you don't have something, you can substitute something, and if you don't like something, you can make it your own too. So I think starting off following recipes, and then getting once you get more comfortable in the techniques, which is when I went to culinary school, that really like is something I learned that I still use today. Is just thinking why something works the way it does. Why do you braise brisket instead of sautéing it? Because it's a tough cut of meat that you really have to break down. So once you learn some of the techniques, then you can feel comfortable twisting them and making them your own too.
So you love to cook, but clearly baking, I feel like that's what holds your heart. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, I know. I love both. I love all the food, and I love both of them. I think it's special because I grew up. My mom and my bubby are like super bakers. They're good cooks too, but like baking is definitely where the memories are. And my cookbook is all desserts, which I thought was initially I wanted to do a cookbook with savory and sweet recipes, and then a publisher approached me about doing this book, and I was like, you know what, this is perfect because I grew up baking. I have so many fond memories of being in the kitchen, like rolling up the rugula, and then it was time to clean up and I ran away. It's just like I'm like, oh, it's like just such a wonderful time. Like a lot of my memories growing up are like that. And now I have a 1-year-old daughter, and she's just like starting to get into the kitchen. Like she'll help me like mix up some pancakes in the morning, and she's so into it. And it's just like such a fun thing. I think baking is just something you do with your family, like somehow. And when I came out with my cookbook, I didn't really think about this until people were sending me all the pictures of them and their kids baking together, and like and still I just got a video the other day of I have a black and pink cookie, where the pink is raspberry instead of the black and white of the traditional half moon cookie. And her kid was helping her bake them, and I don't know, she was like 4 or 5, and I'm like, oh my god, I love this. This is such a fun bonding thing. It's something that was so important to me growing up too, that I hope to keep doing with my daughter and future generations too.
So really, who knew when you were hosting these like multicultural Passovers in college and then educating via your blog that you would be able to inspire that bonding over something you love so much. So
Yeah, I love it. It's nice to hear you put it like that. That's very
is there a recipe that you love, that's, I don't know, you or a spin or just something to share? Because I love to include a recipe in the recap so people get a taste, like a literal one of you, not
yeah.
just the awesomeness of everything you put out there. So
Oh, thank
what
Yes, there's a lot of recipes that I think could define me, but I I don't drink that much really, especially now that I have a kid. But I tend to use alcohol in my recipes a lot. I think it's fun. Like I love using Manischewitz wine. One of this brisket I made when I lived in Texas. So Texas is known for their smoked brisket, and I had a friendsgiving, and I made a braised brisket, and it was a whiskey braised brisket with cranberries, and I all my Texas friends were like, "All right, I'm transformed. You're right. Like braised brisket is the way to go. Like you got me." Um, so when I was thinking about that, I have this in my cookbook. It's called Drunken Honey Pomegranate Cake, which is a twist on just like a Rosh Hashanah honey cake. Although you could totally make it all year. I think this is a good one because it's really just like a one bowl kind of cake. So if you're just starting to learn how to cook, this is a good one for you to try. There's like it's measuring, of course, like with baking, and you have to make sure it's done. But everything's just like mixing in one bowl together. So it's like a pretty good starter recipe. Um, and honey cake has a tradition or like a reputation, I guess, for just being dry and like not that appealing, but somehow it's like always at Rosh Hashanah. So this one's not like that at all. It's a twist on a cake that my bubby used to make too. So of course, very important to me. But it uses pomegranate juice, honey, of course, and there's some whiskey in it, which you can leave out. You can substitute more pomegranate juice if you don't want to cook with the whiskey, but it gives it just this like really nice kind of like warm spiciness. So it's more of a fall recipe, but I think you can make it all year. And actually, this is funny. So it has like a frosting on it. I love to add color to my food too. A lot of Jewish food, especially Ashkenazi food, is brown. And I think some of the best food is brown. Like, even like brisket, chopped liver, rugel. It's all brown. So this cake is brown, but it has a pomegranate frosting on it, so it's like bright pink, and then pomegranate arrows on top. So I actually brought it to my friend's Christmas party, and I dyed the frosting green, and then put the pomegranate arrows, and it looked like a wreath. And I was like, I didn't even know. So it's very versatile. I'm like, oh, I brought you Jewish cake. You don't even know it. So anyway, I think you can kind of make it all year, even though it definitely has some fall vibes to it.
Well, I love a honey, and
Ah.
I think cake is like year round good anyway.
This is a
I
great cake too, because the more like if you make it today, it's even better tomorrow, and it's even like a little better the next day. It just like gets more moist, for lack of a better word, I guess.
Awesome. So if you go to jewishjournal.com/podcast, you'll get like a recap and the highlights and this wonderful recipe. So I'm really excited to share that. Do you have any other tips for making not just I love colorful, so making food fun and colorful. And I'm with you about the boring Ashkenazi food, but is there anything better than latke and applesauce, even though they're like the same color,
Yeah, I mean, I'm not knocking Ashkenazi food at all. It's some of my
right?
favorite food, and brown food is some of my favorite food as well. So but I like to. I think you eat with your eyes. So I try to garnish with like some fresh herbs, and I like to think like my ancestors are from Poland and Austria and that sort of thing. So I'm like, if they had access to avocados, of course they would have used avocados. In some maybe to garnish a latke. So why not just incorporate some fresh food and colorful food into your Jewish recipes too. So even on my chopped liver, I'll put some chives on top and serve it with a ton of different colorful veggies. It just makes for like a pretty presentation. But I
And
love
this
but I love Ashkenazi food and I love brown food, so I'm standing by those statements.
well, the more we talk, I'm like, same, same, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
definitely we were destined to meet and be food besties for
Yes,
sure.
yeah. We'll have to meet in person and eat lots of brown food someday.
Absolutely. And then the other thing too that you said before, which I feel like we need to asterisk and highlight, is what do you love and how can you incorporate it to make, because you love making recipes your own. So is that really, I guess there should have been a question. Is this the best way for people to make foods their own?
I mean, I think you can do whatever feels right to you. So if feeling right to you for Passover, I always make a classic matzo ball soup. It's just not Passover, even though I love to do twists on matzo ball soup. I have like probably 10 different matzo ball soup recipes on my blog. But Passover, on like the actual Seder, I'm wanting classic. So kind of like do what feels right to you. Something that I always joke about is, I make my bourbon braised brisket, and someone's like, that's not traditional. That's not how my grandma made brisket, and I'll ask like, "How did she make brisket?" And they're like, "Well, she started with like Lipton soup mix." And I'm like, "All right, do you think that's how people have been making brisket for like 2,000 years?" Like, no, she's using her resources, using what like makes sense at the time, and it's kind of like fashion. Things make sense at the time, they change, but they really say something about the time we're in, which I think is really cool and beautiful. So I love making my bubby's classic brisket with a bottle of ketchup. And I love making my twists too. So I think it's good to incorporate a little bit of both. But just to remember, the recipes and food are always evolving. And what maybe we think of as like the way to make something has evolved over the years too.
It's like a marriage between traditional foods and forward thinking, right? And
Yeah.
and go back to the recipes that you got that had a little of this, a little of that. Adding a little of this and a little of that to some of your favorites is really going to give it that twist it needs.
Yeah, I think I think mostly I really believe you can feel when someone's cooking with love. Like when someone cooks for you, it just tastes better than if you make it yourself somehow. So I think that's something to remember too when you're getting nervous cooking. Just people, if you're cooking for someone that you love, they'll be able to taste that in the food.
Is there something about cooking that you know now that you wish you knew when you started this journey?
I mean, I think I'm always learning different cooking techniques and everything too. So now everyone always tells my husband that, like, oh, he must be so lucky. He just walked in. He's so lucky to be married to a blogger, and like honestly, he makes most of our food. So I'm always learning new things from him too. He like really loves to work at recipes and learn techniques from different cultures to try to make them even better. So try to like make chicken crispier and like how you can tweak it a little bit and like add in different flavors. And so I don't know. I just feel like I'm always learning new things too. You never stop learning.
So you're a whole foodie family and you're training
Oh
your
yeah,
child
yes,
already.
yeah. Our daughter, luckily, so far is not a picky eater at all. She literally loves everything. Um, so I hope I don't know. I'm sure that might change because she's only one, but so far we're really happy with that.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for
Sure, thank
spending
you.
time today. Where can people learn more about you and your blog and your recipes and everything?
Sure, my blog is whatdowwanntoeat.com. That's my Instagram handle as well, which is probably where I post the most. And then my store is moderntribe.com, which I didn't really mention too much, but I own an online Judaica store with my brother that we've had since 2016. So I love it. So it's all like modern Jewish products to go with the modern recipes. So that's actually where I even focus most of my time now. It's just been a really fun way to connect with people and to give them these Jewish ritual objects that fit their life and um, help them be Jewish in their own way.
I think a really good example, I saw you've got a magic 8 ball on
Oh yeah,
there.
yeah. And instead of having answers, it has more questions. So you'll ask it a question and it says, "You call that a question?" It's really funny. We sell a ton of those. A new product that so a lot of the items we get wholesale from other people, but we're working on some of our own products. And for Passover, we just launched a matzo ball soup candle that smells like matzo ball soup. So if you don't feel like making matzo ball soup this Passover, but you still want that scent of Seder in your house, matzo ball soup candle is the answer for you.
Wow. Well, I just said this on, I also host the Gold Chat Live show, and I just said this week, which is there's nothing better than the smell of matzo ball soup.
Yeah, I'll be honest, this is not as good as homemade matzo ball soup, the smell, but it's like it's pretty good.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Do you have a final bit of food for thought?
I think we've been saying the whole time is that food should be fun, and it should be about sharing with other people and just like enjoying time. And it's just one of my favorite ways to bond and connect with people. So have fun.
Uh, perfect, perfect, perfect. Thank you so much,
Thank you,
Amy
Deborah.
Kritzer Becker, for joining me today. And thank you for tuning in to Taste Buds with Deb. Don't miss an episode. You can subscribe on YouTube and or your favorite podcast platform. And go to jewishjournal.com/podcast to get that wonderful pomegranate drunken honey cake recipe
Yeah.
and read articles that go with each episode. And you can learn more at tastebudswithdeb.com. Until next time, have fun with the food, be colorful, be ambitious, and until we meet again, bon appetit.